Welcome to the Jim Ruff Show. I'm here with two guests this time, and we're going to learn about breakthrough economics. And my first guest is Jeff Smith.
Hey, Jim.
And he's the guy I originally zonked onto in looking at ideas around the Wisdom Council, really, about how to, what are some of the breakthrough ideas that are out there that can make a real substantial difference. And I came to Jeff's work, and he has a fantastic strategy that he's talking about and selling. And then he came over with Tom Greco, and Tom's an expert too in this field and also in a related field about community currencies. And so Tom was able to join us as well. So Jeff, maybe you could, let me just tell part of my excitement about what you're doing, and that is that Jeff has an idea for how we can fix our economic system to make it really work for everybody by basically eliminating taxes and paying people money, two parts. Mm-hmm. And the third part is that the government would get rent, would charge rent to pay for these things through renting its land. And the land would be basically based on our community property. That's the end result. Mm-hmm. And it would work, and it would change our incentives so that they make sense for the environment. Isn't that?
That's it. That's it in a nutshell. Yeah.
So what's the problem that this solves? Tell us what the problem is, you see it, and how you, and then maybe talk about your strategy for solving it.
Okay. Also, let me give you some real-world examples of different parts of this. For instance, the world-class city for business, the best city in the world for conducting international commerce is Hong Kong. And that exists entirely on publicly owned land. So that aspect of the plan is in place in Hong Kong. Another part, the citizens' dividend, that is in Alaska. Every person in Alaska gets a check each year just for being a resident of Alaska. I think it's a 3-month tenure. So that part of the plan is in place somewhere. So it demonstrates that the idea is feasible. The challenge is the politics of getting it into legislation, and that requires, of course, the discourse, the conversation that would take place in a Wisdom Council, for example. But once you have this, if you have extra income apart from your labor and your capital, then you can shrink your work week. If you do that, you don't have to have a 40-hour work week with rush hour. And rush hour is the single most destructive thing we do individually to the environment. You could have flex time and get rid of rush hour and the air pollution that goes with it and the runoff that goes with it and all the other destructive aspects of a car-based culture. If we got rid of taxes and had user fees and land dues and so forth, we would not distort price so badly. If we got rid of subsidies, we would not distort price so badly. And if price is accurate, if it reflects costs and values, we can conduct our exchange much more consciously. Right now, if you oppose any environmental problem, and if you pay taxes, they get turned into subsidies which support that problem. You might oppose logging or whatever, but you're paying for it when you pay taxes. So if we could...
How's that?
Well, the legislature, the Congress, collects your taxes and gives it to Weyerhaeuser and everybody through free logging roads and other tax breaks and subsidies to go in there and just chop down more trees. So
our current system is supporting lots of things that are unfriendly to the environment, like these rush hour and a lot of ecologically damaging practices in companies. And you're saying that this change to the tax structure of our society would alleviate problems that would have ramifications that would go all over the place and affect even rush hour traffic.
Sure. It's like Muir said, pull on any one thing in the universe and you find it hitched to everything else. So if you make a reform here, it's going to have tremendous downstream benefits. Some other ones, for example, wages, or the cost of living goes down as taxes go down. So whatever the wages are at, they have greater buying power. So then you can have a more comfortable standard of living, and you could shrink your work week again. What are some of the other benefits? You increase the owner occupancy, and where that goes up, you get greater citizen participation in a democracy. There's a great study of Central California, 2 towns. Okay. One town has very low owner occupancy. It's a one company town. And the other, everybody owns their own little home site or farm or whatnot. And in that town, the potholes are filled. The library hours are longer. Use of parks are greater. The public hearings and the town hall meetings are filled with people because everybody has a stake in that little society.
Right. So you're saying, I mean, if we could get to this end place that you're describing, the benefits are just absolutely immense. One of which is that all of us own these collective properties. All of us own this, and so we together charge rent to whoever wants to use land, and which is a collectively owned property.
Yeah.
And that because then we distribute that money to all of us.
That's right.
And so because of the extra money and because of the attitude changes, you're saying that would make a tremendous difference. And what about the complaint? And maybe I should, well, let me ask, do you have something, Tom, do you want to add something to what Jeff's been saying here?
Well, I would like to ask Jeff to explain the fundamental rationale behind all this. There are 3 interrelated structural problems that I see. Taxes is one, the land problem is another one, and the money problem is the third. And we'd like to get a little bit into explaining those, but Jeff, could you just explain the difference between the commons, what was called trusteity by Ralph Borsodi, and I think, did Henry George use that term?
No.
And, well, Ralph Borsodi made a distinction between trusteity and property, and maybe you could get into the fundamental rationale as to how we can collect this funds through rental rather than imposition of taxes and redistribute as a citizen's dividend.
Oh, okay. Well, you look at land and resources, and they have tremendous economic value. I mean, you can't go up to a vacant lot in Port Townsend and say, oh, that's nice, I'll take that. I mean, you have to pay for it, right? And you can't go to an oil field and expect to extract it without having to pay somebody. So both sites and resources have this great value, but there's no labor involved in creating land or resources. So there's no person that you have to compensate for their labor.
It's just natural that they're there.
It's a common natural heritage.
Life just presents these things.
Right.
And just with the minerals that the mining companies take out of the ground and the petroleum that's sucked out of the ground and the trees that are cut from the forests, this is all natural resource that was there that nobody had any role in producing.
Right.
They're God-given, if you will. Right. And so that's considered to be the common heritage of everyone. Right.
And their value is not created by Weyerhaeuser or Rockefeller or any single lone owner. The value of every site and every resource is created by the society as a whole. So for those 2 reasons, each person who's going to claim some part of the common heritage for themselves owes everybody else a compensation. So that's the moral foundation.
So there's a moral foundation. So you're distinguishing between property that somebody puts effort into and they own, they can have the right to own that way. And then there's stuff that's just natural heritage.
Sure.
And you're saying that if we design our economics so that takes into account that reality, that difference, then we would all own the common heritage portion.
Sure.
And charge rent on that when people want to use it, and we'd all feel motivated to take care of it. Now, I know there's a bell going off in a lot of people's minds out there thinking socialism, socialism, socialism. Maybe you could address that for a minute. Is this socialism?
Well, no, it's not. It's funny, the people on the right call it socialism, but the people on the left call it capitalism. And the reason being, the people on the right, they hear that sharing. They don't like sharing. And the people on the left, they hear getting rid of taxes and subsidies, and they don't want that. They want a government to run the show. But one point I want to make quickly not only is land our common heritage, but so is this ethical foundation. The words own and owe used to be one word. If you owned land, you owed rent. And that was understood in those days, centuries ago. So we're trying to resurrect a moral tradition. And instead of paying up to a landlord, we pay out to our neighbors. So it's replacing hierarchy with an egalitarian structure. That's the essential difference. And what was the second point?
Is this socialism?
Socialism. Well, socialism doesn't call for the abolition of taxes and subsidies. So it's not socialism. It's a third way. And what makes it a third way is not just this different, the bumper sticker is this: you don't pay for what you make, you pay for what you take. So there's no taxes on your home, on your business, on your income, right? Because that's, those are values you generate, and those belong to you. But the values that society generate just by being there, the more people want to flock into one place, the higher the values are there. No single lone owner creates density. No single lone owner creates the economic value of a location. That's a social phenomenon that belongs to all of society. Yes. And through land dues and a citizen's dividend, we can pay each other and get back from each other that socially generated value.
The best example, it seems to me, that I've heard you talk about in the past is when the community builds something that adds value to adjacent properties that becomes a windfall gain to whoever happens to own those properties. And I think you talked about the metro system in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, if you look at the cost to build the subways in our nation's capital, several $billion, expensive. Should we spend that money or not spend that money? And then look at how much land values increased from building that system. It's a clear yes. And a guy named William Vickery got a Nobel Prize for noting that there's never been a public works system that didn't pay for itself by increasing land value. The only problem is we don't collect that to pay for that system. To come here today to Port Townsend, we crossed that Hood Canal. If you looked at the land values of the peninsula before that bridge was built and after, what do you think you'd find? Yeah. Tremendous skyrocketing in land values here that could easily pay for that transportation infrastructure. And you could probably have a passenger train running up and down the peninsula and save the environment if you were collecting site value to plug into both the dividend and into social services.
Yeah. So the idea would be anytime the community invests money to create something that raises the land values, those land values should be taxed back in order to pay for that improvement.
Yeah, we say tax back because tax is the generic term, but it doesn't have to be a tax. It could be a user fee. It could be a higher annual deed fee. It could be land dues. It could be a lease.
I think we're mixing two things here. One is that if you get the ideal state in place, everybody owns the land.
That would be the realization, after a generation of this system in place. Right.
But before that, there's some interim steps here involved, and that would be where you would tax the land exclusively and not tax what's built on it would be kind of the way you'd structure that.
Yeah.
And so, but the land at values would be going up like crazy because of a public works project, and so you would tend to realize that benefit in higher, in the value of that land use coming up and then going to the taxpayer owner or to the public.
Yeah.
But it seems like because this is where I was getting confused before, is that in the ideal, what you'd really like to get to is where everybody owns all these things that are come out of the...
Well, the whole earth would be in trust, and all the earthlings would be trustees.
Yes.
That's the ultimate. Yeah.
That's the ultimate. And then, but in the meantime, what you're saying is I pay taxes on my land, and there's two portions of that. One is the buildings and stuff, and the other is the land. And what you're saying is we shouldn't pay any taxes on the buildings and such.
That's right.
But we should just pay on the land.
Just like they do in Sydney, Australia. It's a world-class city, beautiful city. And the property owners there do not pay a penny on their improvement, just for the location. And it's a small rate, it's just to fund the city, but location values in Sydney are some of the highest in the world. If they could collect that, and they could pay a dividend that would eliminate local poverty, that would just drastically change the quality of life, which is already pretty good, but it could be even better.
Aren't some cities in Philadelphia moving in this direction, or in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, and Philadelphia being one of them, as a matter of fact. But
so they're reducing the tax rate on the buildings, but increasing it on the land so that they come out with the same amount of revenue.
That's right. In Allentown, which was the subject of a song by Billy Joel a couple decades back in the Reagan years, they voted in this system. So it can be done popularly. It can be done by raising the awareness of the electorate and getting them to vote for it. In Allentown, they had to vote for it twice because the real estate speculators put it back on the ballot to try to get rid of it. And the second time, it passed by an even higher margin. And sometimes it comes in democratically like that. Sometimes it comes in top down. In Mexico, Mexicali, the mayor introduced it. He got all the rich people in the town together around the same table and said, look, this is poor. Mexicali's not prosperous. Wouldn't you rather be rich in a rich town? And so here's how we can do it. Shift the tax, take it off improvements, put it on locations.
Well, to go slower, because I think people need to hear these words. Here's how to do it.
Okay, here's how to do it.
Yeah.
Right now we have a conventional property tax levied both on the improvement, the building, and the location, the land. That means if you improve your property, you increase your tax liability and lose money. It's a penalty. If you speculate and underuse your land, maybe nothing, maybe a parking lot, we give you a tax break. So what are the incentives for? Speculation and non-improvement. It breeds slums and so forth. So that's what they had in Mexicali, a typical urban mess. So the mayor wanted to do something for the people. He was from the new party, PAN, and all these election promises to fulfill. He wasn't tied to any particular ideology or power structure. So he assembled the local elite into a discussion in informal, what were you calling them, Wisdom Council, and said, look, every place that has tried this, taken tax off the structure, put it onto the location, has motivated the owners to improve their situation.
Because it's cheaper.
It's cheaper.
You don't have to pay tax on the improvements, so it's cheaper.
And by improving, that requires hiring people, so employment goes up.
Yes.
Those people have money, they spend it locally, so the local economy improves. Every place that has done it has bettered themselves. Why don't we do it? Wouldn't you like to be rich in a rich town than just, rich in a slovenly town? And they went for it, and it worked.
How much opposition was there?
There wasn't any, because it's a system that's very hierarchical, Mexico. And so if you get the wealthy on your side,
it happens.
It steamrolls.
It happens.
In Australia, the best example where this has been done, two salient facts. In Melbourne, around Melbourne, there's a number of suburbs, really part of the city, but they call them suburbs. Half were using the conventional property tax, half were just taxing land, not taxing buildings. The ones that had the land tax had 50% greater build value per acre. Because you didn't have to pay a tax on your improvement, you made buildings of 50% higher quality.
So, Jeff and Tom, why does this not take off? It seems to me there's so much benefit, and whenever it's tried, all the benefit starts to happen. Why does it somehow get snuffed out when experiments like this happen?
Let me give you one stat and one answer to that. And one more statistic. Those towns around Melbourne, during the last recession, not this one, when the whole state was losing business, lost 20% of its business, those land taxing towns didn't lose, they actually increased. They had an increase of 10% in new businesses opening up. But every place that has adopted this has succeeded for one generation. Because it succeeded, it drove up land values. Where there's greater prosperity, there's higher land values. These speculators see that and they wipe it out. And the property owners go along with it because Most of the middle class don't have any savings. All they have is their equity in their land. They call it their home value, but truly it's a locational value. And they want that for themselves. And they can't see any way to get it except by borrowing against it or selling out and moving on. But what happens when you sell out and move on is you destroy the fabric of your community. And that's one reason why community has been destroyed in America. And following that, now we have family being destroyed by both parents having to work just to keep a family together, never mind put kids through college. And at some point, people are going to say, enough's enough, and we're going to have to do something drastic, radical, and that's going to be a citizen's dividend based on that social surplus, which the majority of which is land value and resource value. And people are going to have to see that they are going to have to pay higher land values to get zero taxes and to get that extra income apart from their labor and their capital. So they're going to have to, it's like Tarzan swinging on vines. You can't grab the next one unless you let go of the past one. But that's the only way you can move forward. So,
Jeff, has anybody done a statistical study to see if we eliminate all the taxes on income, sales taxes, and other taxes, and impose only a tax on the extraction of natural resources and the use of sites, what would the general impacts be?
you mean their income?
Yeah. Would we be all better off if we don't have to pay all those taxes? Would government still be able to fund its operations?
Tom, it sounds like you know a study like that.
I don't offhand, no.
Oh.
No. Well, there are some estimates. There's that book, The $30,000 Solution by Bob Schultz.
Right.
And the estimates are really pretty varied. His was over $2,000 a month. Another was like $500 a month, the citizen's dividend. I think it would be closer to $1,000 a month. But tremendous benefits for both the individual and for government. And government would probably have to increase user fees, but I think that's a good thing. I think people should know the cost of what it is they want to accept from government. You know, it's you get greater efficiencies of scale is if the costs are not buried in just paying into a general fund and getting some kind of subsidized service back.
I think we're going to probably run out of time before we get to do all the great work we need to do on this topic, but it sounds like one of the things you're saying is that we've got an economic system that's misaligned with nature and with human nature and nature and reality.
Yeah.
And you have a design for how to make that in alignment. And there's a big gap between getting from one to the next, it seems like. Like how, do you have any thoughts about how that might happen? How could we get to this place of where we all own this? And
yeah, the economy can be part of the ecosystem, and what ecosystems depend upon are feedback loops, and those are distorted by taxes and subsidies. We could get prices to be correct by eliminating taxes, subsidies, and instead having land dues and dividends, and we can get there incrementally, step by step. Let's say over 5 years, 20% reduction in taxes and subsidies each year, 20% increase in land value charges each year, and a 20% increase.
Let's go slower. Hold on. 20% reduction in
the tax on your home, the sales tax, income tax,
and all taxes except for the property.
For the land part of the property tax.
Yeah,
right.
Leave the land part of the property tax, but everything else, all taxes get reduced 20% per year, you say.
Yeah, well, for the income tax, eliminate it for the bottom quintile, bottom 20% first. Okay. Next year, 40%. Next year, 60%, and so forth.
So you're basically eliminating all those taxes 20% at a time, and then with the, is there a revenue? I'm worried about
for the
revenue.
subsidy side, eliminate subsidies that go to the top 20% of the population first. Next year, for the top 40%. And at the end...
So like what subsidies, what would be a big subsidy that would eliminate?
All right, there's corporate welfare. That's a tremendous wasteful subsidy.
And what form does that take? How, like?
Do you realize that you are paying for the advertisement of McDonald's in Paris right now? You were giving McDonald's, multi-billion dollar corporation, money to advertise their hamburgers abroad to improve the balance of trade, supposedly. That's just one tiny example. But if you look at the entire budget, most of it is either waste or it's very, trickle up, very much oriented to benefit the elite. Most of that could be eliminated. The military budget, over $400 billion now for the Bush campaign to create an empire abroad and fascism at home. Most of that could be eliminated.
So it sounds, but it seems like that's going to be a tough one because right now senators are going, oh my goodness, we have to eliminate the budget. Oh, we can't do it because we need this or that weapons program or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I guess you don't see that as an easy thing, but you see that as just looking at it in reality, looking at it blankly, we don't need all this stuff, but we have to be spending this money because we're caught on a treadmill right now, is what basically you're saying. Okay.
There's a Republican organization in D.C. called Taxpayers for Common Sense, and they're very much against corporate welfare. And every week in their newsletter, they have tons of examples of waste, millions and billions of dollars worth. So just right off the top, we could get rid of that. And that's just typical of most government's budgets. Tremendous amount of waste.
All right, so we're going to have, so you could see it as a graduated piece where the revenue side would go up with increased taxes on property and on land and decreased taxes on, and also getting rid of the waste, especially corporate welfare-oriented stuff.
And Colin Powell's talking about creating an oil dividend in Iraq. So that would set a great model, great example for everywhere else. The dividend doesn't have to come from oil. That's a logical source. But also, look at the high real estate values in the center of Manhattan or Seattle or places like that.
Well, we just can barely touch into it, and thank you for riding shotgun and being a color commentator.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
But Jeff, it sounds to me like you're really onto something here, and it's still early in the cycle, but eventually it seems like this basic message of getting our lives in alignment, our economics in alignment with the way nature works, seems like a very powerful message to me, and I wish you the best of luck with it.
Thanks a lot. It'll take a little bit more than luck, but thanks a lot.
Okay, well, thank you very much to Tom Greco and Jeff Smith, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks.